Well, let's discuss first of all, Britain's high levels of immigration are falling significantly thanks to curbs on visas brought in by the last Conservative government. Cabinet Office Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds this morning told us they've got no plans to change the rules, but wouldn't go as far as giving any praise to the previous government. Front page of the Times today saying that applications for visas and people actually coming here on health and care and study visas fell by more than a third in July to 91,300 compared to last year. Jack, first of all, do you think it is a good thing that these numbers are coming down?
Almost certainly, because it will increase public confidence and it will give the new government space to arrange the policy alignments in a way that suits the economy, our education system and our security better. I think the major issue over the years has been a feeling amongst the population that immigration, the business of managing immigration was out of control, that successive governments did not know the numbers, didn't know who was in the country and who was not in the country, and that policies were being made on the hoof and then not delivered. So I think the critical change that needs to happen is somebody needs to have and prove that they have an overview. They have all the up-to-date information and data. They know what our economy needs, but also they know who's coming into the country and why they're coming. And then they manage the numbers and the services that are then required on that basis. And I think all of that was partly linked to EU expansion and the influx of people under the previous freedom of movement. It was partly linked to the abolition of the ID card scheme by the Cameron government in 2010. But overall, there was this general feeling that everything was out of control. And I think the first thing the new government's got to do is make sure that it is linking up all the different levers and policies, getting them under control, and then actually delivering what it promises to deliver.
What do you think about this, Miriam Kate? Because on the surface, people may well say that's good, that the numbers of people coming into the country have fallen by a third, those people who are coming in on visas. But when you read into it, an 82% decline in the number of people on health and care visas, who's going to fill the health and care jobs that have got these huge vacancies?
Well, I think the problem with the health and care visa scheme is that it wasn't working at all, and it was actually providing some very perverse incentive for employers. So I think in the 12 months to July last year, there had been 70,000 people granted visas to come over on that visa scheme, plus dependents, so over 100,000 visas issued. And yet in that time, the number of vacancies in that sector dropped by just 11,000. So in other words, for every 10 visas given out, only one job was taken up. Now, we don't know exactly what was happening there. Were British workers being displaced? Were people coming over and then not doing that job for very long and going into another part of the economy? We don't know. But the reason that scheme was cracked down upon so much was that it just wasn't working. It wasn't actually delivering health and care visas. It was just seen as a soft touch for people who wanted to come here for other reasons. So yes, there are shortages in that sector, but the problem with that visa scheme was that it just enabled unscrupulous employers to keep wages very, very low because they had this constant source of employment from abroad. So I think the answer to the health and care worker shortage is for British employers to pay better wages so that more British people want to do that job and to continue in that job for longer rather than having the high turnover that we are. So this is the problem with discussing immigration, is that you get these headlines about numbers, but then you really have to dig into all the different types of immigration and whether different schemes are working or not. So of course, a big number over the last few years has been the number of people that have come from Ukraine and Hong Kong. And the vast majority of British people, as far as I understand, agree with those kind of humanitarian visas, and they are one-off schemes. They won't happen every year. But when it comes to low-skilled, low-wage migration that actually reduces our GDP per capita, clearly the way people have voted in the last several elections shows that people don't support that kind of migration. And that's why the last government was right to change the rules on it and had been so wrong to get it so wrong after Brexit.
I mean, I think Roger probably sums up what some of our listeners will be thinking. The reduction of care worker visas is bad news if you're looking for someone to look after your elderly mum or dad. And I guess
I
that
just
is...
said it wasn't working. That was the point. Had it delivered 100,000 care workers, this would have been a completely different conversation. But the point was it didn't deliver care workers. It just provided a soft touch immigration route. And all it did was displace British workers. It didn't reduce the number of vacancies. So it didn't work. That's what I'm saying. And the headline is, oh dear, this means fewer care workers. But that's not the truth at all.
Jack?
Well, I come back to the issue of control. I think you need to have a sensible discussion about everything from care provision in this country, where people either don't want to, or are not paid well enough to, or are not trained to the level that's required in order to fill these jobs, and therefore people are required from elsewhere, whether it's in agriculture, where there's seasonal work required that is not taken up these days by people who originally live in the UK in a way that perhaps it was done in decades gone by, and therefore people come in from other countries and deliver that seasonal work. But it's very hard to have those discussions if the population at large feels that the system is out of control, and you then get into a situation where you get all this kind of nonsense that's spoken about people. I saw a guy interviewed as part of these riots in the last few days, going on about how immigrants were taking all the jobs, and then in the next sentence saying all these immigrants, they come here, they never work, and they just live on benefits. You get all this nonsense going on in the general pub chat of the country, because of the fact that the people feel that the politicians and the government are making it up on the hoof, promising to do stuff and not delivering. There has been, report after report after report, heads of the Borders Agency, top quality police officers running the Borders Agency, saying, Borders Inspectorate, saying, this is not working. And this has been going on for way over a decade. It's way before Brexit. And unless you get the whole system under control, and you deal with facts and data, and then you put the policies in place, and then you work hard to deliver them, then people get angry, and that creates tensions, and we see the result on our streets over the last couple of weeks. So the whole thing is all linked together, and it is about, at its core, it is about having a government that is serious. It is that people can have confidence, they know what they're doing, they're telling the truth, and they are then delivering on the things that they say they're going to deliver. And it's not just responding to headlines and trying to deal with issues one by one, when it's actually the whole picture that needs to be managed effectively. And the best countries in the world that do this do it in a managed way across the whole system.
Yeah, Hi. And Miriam, that is the point, isn't it? That actually governments have not been honest. They have misled. In manifesto after manifesto, there has been a commitment on immigration, which has never really come close to fruition, actually. And so that in itself is something that is fundamentally and philosophically undermining of government and faith in government and faith that government will deliver. That is a real issue.
I think that's absolutely right. And at the heart of this issue is a failure of democracy. People have voted for the same thing time after time. I think since 2010, all those elections we've had since then, including Brexit, people have voted for lower immigration. Most reasonable people agree that we do need some immigration, that we certainly need some high-skill immigration. But almost everybody who voted for Conservative in 2019 agreed that 200,000 a year was too high. And then, of course, in the last few years, we've seen net numbers of 600, 700,000. So I think the vast majority of people believe that that's too high. And the question is, how on earth have we got the situation where people have voted so clearly for something for more than a decade and yet got the opposite? And I think perhaps partly there's a failure of honesty, a failure to discuss this properly and in a grown-up way. But also I think it's a failure of competence, quite simply, because the Conservative government promised a points-based system based on the Australian system. It delivered a points-based system, but unfortunately the points needed, or the barrier to entry to this country, was set so low, the salary requirement for a work visa was set so low that it resulted in these enormous number of people coming into the country. And the graduate visa scheme was restarted No popular demand for that at all. It wasn't in the manifesto. And yet that was restarted in 2021, having been closed 10 years previously.
Well,
so there is no real excuse for either of those things, apart from it was incompetent and it failed to deliver what people asked for. And of course, the Labour government now has the challenge of reducing those numbers significantly, when of course employers will say, we need these workers, we want cheap labour from abroad. And this is a very difficult discussion for the Labour government to have, because on the one hand, employers do of course want cheaper labour, and we need to make sure that they don't get it, that they invest in British skills and British workforce. But there is also a fact, which is that because our birth rates are so low, we have about 200,000 fewer young people coming into the economy today than we did a few decades ago. And so that's why we have a genuine shortage of fruit pickers, agricultural workers, care workers, etc., because we just don't have enough young people coming in.
You think young people would do those jobs?
I think if there were no other jobs, then of course young people would do those jobs. But the problem is our labour market is so tight, because we have about, there was a report out today in the Telegraph actually saying that in the 1960s, you had about 900,000 births a year. We've now got about 600,000 births a year. So every year you've got 300,000 more people retiring than going into the workplace. Well, that is a huge gap in the labour market. And that's what's fueled mass immigration. It's the government's fault to have let so many people in. But what's fueling the tight labour market is our very low birth rate. And I just can't see the Labour government owning up to that fact, or even understanding that fact, quite honestly, and then having a plan in place to deal with it.
Jack, just a final thought from you on this?
Well, just on that point, I think it's been interesting to listen. I think you had a conversation yesterday, maybe on your other show, Callum, about the health service and the fact that it's going to take several years to repair the damage that's been done in the health service over the past, dozen or so years. And I think the government, and if the government explains that, people might be impatient, but they will at least understand that the new government's got a strategy that will piece by piece put it back together again. I think they need to do the same thing on immigration, and I think the vast majority of decent people in this country are not stupid. They are willing to be persuaded if they feel that the government's got a situation under control, got a plan for it, and are actually delivering what they are promising, and not just responding to headlines. So I think the government needs to set out a longer-term plan and say that we cannot train up all the healthcare workers we need in the next 6 months. So we need to have people coming to help us to make sure we can have a better care system. But here is the target for 3 years from now, when we've done all that training and we've got all that recruitment and we've got maybe the salary level increased and so on, so that we can actually have a better balance in that system. And I think if government explains these things and shows that it's got a medium-term plan and then sticks to it and actually delivers it and focuses on it and doesn't get diverted, then I think people can be persuaded. And we did that in Scotland back 20 years ago. We had the Fresh Talent Visa, which is one version of the graduate visa that Miriam just mentioned. We didn't just put in place a special visa for Scotland for graduates to stay on and work and live to help us deal with depopulation, successfully deal with depopulation. We looked at housing and education and community integration and all the other issues that went with it, and we did it as a whole package. And we persuaded people. We were honest about what we were doing. People were persuaded, and the actual initiative worked. And I think that can be done again, but it needs government to get control. It needs government to then lay out a plan and then to stick to it and work hard to actually deliver it.